Bonjour à toutes et tous, vous écoutez First Print, votre podcast comics préféré pour une nouvelle émission de notre format Super Friends. C'est dans ce podcast qu'on va à la rencontre des personnes qui font vivre la pop culture et la culture comics par leur travail. Et on se retrouve pour une ultime interview réalisée en plein cœur du festival Facts dans la ville de Gand en Belgique, auquel on vous recommande fortement d'aller, puisque là nous serons en compagnie de Gabriel Rodriguez, dessinateur qui nous vient du Chili, et qui est connu entre autres de nombreux travaux pour son travail sur la série Locke Key, mais qui vient d'ailleurs de signer une toute nouvelle mini-série dans l'univers de Mouse Guard de David Peterson. Donc on va pouvoir aborder un petit peu tous ces travaux. Le générique se lance et puis on se retrouve avec Gabriel juste après en anglais. So this is really, really nice to have you here, Gabriel Rodriguez. I'm very honored to have you in our podcast. How are you?
Very good, thank you. It's a pleasure to be talking to you about all this creative stuff, comic stories. It's always a pleasure to talk to someone that's actually interested in this kind of content. So for you and your audience, it's a pleasure.
And I think my audience will be pleased also a lot. And I think there's a lot of people who love Locke Key and the other works that you've done. But since this is the first time we actually speak together, can we go back just to the beginning?
Okay.
In terms of how would you introduce yourself very briefly?
Yeah.
And the second part is how did comics get into your life?
Well, I guess the beginning of my life and my introduction to comics get very hand to hand because my early introductions to illustrated books and comic books was when I was a very young child, because from very early on, my parents realized that I like drawing. So even the first memories that I have from myself are sitting in a table drawing when I was probably 3 or 4 years old. And from then on, I never stopped in this relationship with creative art. And in a very young age, I got early access to the first copies of comic books and a few European albums as well of the huge classics like Asterix and Tintin. And I fell in love with the medium like immediately. This capacity to tell an engaging story through text combined with illustrations always fascinated me. So from very early on, I started like copying drawings at school. When I finished the test at schools, the teachers allowed me in the back of the page of the test to do drawings while I wait my classmates to finish their tests. And I always got like a lot of freedom to do whatever I wanted in art class at school as well. And at home, my mom and dad always took care for me and even for my siblings, because my brothers and sisters also were very fond of drawing or creative things. So they always have like stacks of paper and coloring pencils for us from the very. It was like our main entertainment at home, especially in winter times. And then when I was finishing high school and I began my studies in architecture, because I'm an architect, I had an architectural degree. I sort of, for a little while, put aside comics and art and drawing because, one, in Chile, we do not have an established like publishing industry for this kind of books. So I never thought that I could professionally work in a field like this. And then also architecture is very time consuming when you're in the university. You basically, there's a couple days a week that you skip sleeping and you have to work in these projects like very intensely, lot of teamwork for projects in long term and everything. But then when I was a year or two about to finish my career, I got back to illustration, taking a few freelance jobs for advertising and stuff like that. Then I got a couple commissions for illustrations for presentations of books and stuff like this. And then I remember when I was finishing my studies, there was a group of guys in Chile that tried to set a publishing company following the model of Image Comics. So for a year and a half or so, they published several titles. And I thought that company was still going. So I decided that the last summer that I have in my studies, instead of going on vacation, I would spend it in writing and drawing a single issue of a comic book. So I did that. and I took that material and took it to that publishing company. But the fact was that just a couple months before I sent my samples, they bankrupt. So they closed the company. But I was very lucky that one of the guys that was there saw my samples and gave me a contact of a guy that he knew in Spain, that had a study in a studio in Malaga that was making work for independent North American comic publishers. So I sent them a few samples. They told me that they didn't have work for someone like me at that time, but they knew another guy from other studio that was trying to find out an artist, because there was a small publishing company that was beginning in San Diego called IDW Publishing that was looking for an artist to do a comic book adaptation of the TV series CSI, Crime Scene Investigation, that was very popular in the early 2000s. And it was very weird because it was like a TV show about police investigations, but from the scientific point of view of the forensics teams. So I thought to myself, how you make a comic book out of this? But it was like the only chance for a job like that I could have. At that time, I was about to get married, and I started working my job as an architect. But I made a few samples. I sent them to them. Then they mailed it to the US publisher. And a couple weeks back, I got an email of a guy saying me, okay, you're in the shortlist for the last 4 artists that are candidates for this job. I wasn't sure if it was a serious offer, if it was a joke or anything. It just single email. So they asked for a couple more samples. Okay, I took an afternoon, did a couple more samples, and emailed them. And the thing is that a week or so after that, I got another email from those guys telling me, okay, we have 2 finalists. It's you, another guy from Brazil. And the publishing team is going to have a meeting with the production company that runs the TV show, and they're going to pick the guy that's going to draw the comics. So we need you to do a headshot of the 2 main characters of the TV series, please, and send it to us so we can fax it to the meeting in LA. So it was like, okay, I did those drawings, I scanned them, emailed them to San Diego, and in San Diego, they printed them and faxed them to Los Angeles. And the scene was 2.5 hours after that, I got a message that say, okay, you got the job. I still was, is this a hoax? Is this real? So I wasn't sure. But then I got a contact, and a couple weeks after that, I got a script, and I said, okay, someone is working in this, so probably this is real. And I think that same week or the following one, I got in a news site about comics on the internet, it was published that IDW was going to make this comic book based on CSI, and the artist was going to be Gabriel Rodriguez. And then I realized that this thing was actually real.
Yeah.
And I started working in my first professional work in comics.
What a long process to just have samples done and done over again and been in a sort of competition.
Yeah, one of
like
the
that.
things that I learned early on, especially from this experience and other jobs that I had, is persistence is a key part in this. Also, the willingness to be able to do sacrifices on time and effort, invest on this, keep trying to getting better at the craft as you keep practice. Even though if it's at the state that you're doing samples, you really have to be very focused and make each new sample better than the previous one. And the other thing that helped me a lot throughout this process of trying to find a career in this was that I already had another career. So I could sustain myself what I was trying to push to breaking into this industry, in which I had no idea if I would be able to make a living out of it. So every time that I got asked from people back in Chile, what is the first thing I should do if I want to have a career in comics? So I told them, you have to be very passionate. You have to be very willing to do a lot of hard work. And please do have another career that will help you sustain, because there's no way to make a living in this. Even if you get a formal job, it takes a long time before you're able to get a living out of it. For me, it was, I had, after I began with CSI, I worked steadily with IDW for 7 years before being able to work exclusively on comics. It was at the seventh year that I decided, okay, my income is good enough for me to start doing just this. By quitting my architectural job, my paycheck got reduced like a 30% in once, but I had the confidence that if I kept developing my comics career, I could recover that and eventually get in an even better economic situation. So that was a jump of trust. Luckily, I always had support from my immediate family and my friends, so it was a very easy choice to make in that regard. My wife was very supportive of my career from early on because even though she has persisted in her career as an architect, she has been an independent architect from the very beginning. So basically, our careers work in the same way. We even share the same workspace and everything because part of our dynamics constantly is to create our own work and keep the networking steady in terms of getting more job offers and stuff like that. So has been quite a journey so far.
And would you say that even nowadays, now that Locke Key has been published and that it has been a huge success, but you still keep on making comics, but could you stop right now and just live off all the royalties from Locke Key? Or even having a success like this comic book is not enough to be able to live normally until...
No. I couldn't retire because we had 3 kids. So having offspring, you really need to provide like a lot. But and also there's 2 things. One of those is that I want to keep working as long as I can. So even if in the future there's a chance to I don't know, get an earning so good that allow you to do whatever you want without getting worried about the income, I would keep like developing at least projects of my own. So that's one thing. But the other is that even though if you have like a big publishing success in this field, it's not that you get like a fortune at once and you get ready to retire. It's always like, for me in the long run, certainly all the income that I've been having from the royalties of Locke Key and stuff like that has been very good if you make the entire sum, but you never get that amount at once. So you have to be very responsible on how you handle your finances throughout the career in order to make that income to be responsibly managed throughout the time. And when you have like kids and you have to raise them and educate them and take care of their health and everything, you know that there's no such thing as a safe figure in terms of money. So for me, the most important part has been to be reliable to my publishers and to be as constructive as possible in my relationship with all my collaborators, because that's the way in which you really can build a steady career. I've been hearing many times from editors and publishers that they say many times we find really talented people, guys that are very good at the craft, but they are unreliable in terms of timing, or they are too conflictive, or sometimes they lose inspiration and drop the jobs. So that's something that self-sabotages a lot of creators. So being able to realize that you have to always consider this like a marathon, and this is a very, very long run. And also not being too like stressed about the idea of being the best or trying to craft your very best art immediately, but just to have the chance to do this work and being worried that the next page, you should always try to make it better than the previous one. And also being able to work with goodwill and strict discipline with the people that you're committed to, I think is the key to have a successful and steady career.
How do you look back on Locke Key? Now the book, the main series has been finished for quite some time.
Yeah.
But you even got back on that universe in recent years with the Golden Age and also the crossover with the Sandman.
Yeah.
So how do you, now how do you look back on this whole saga?
Locke and Keys, it's an integral part of my life in terms that became something that went way beyond working in a book. It helped me build a friendship with the people that collaborated the project that basically became my brothers at this point. I keep talking to Joe Hill or Jay Photos or Chris Ryle every single week, several times a year. We chat, we do phone calls, we comment our daily routines because we became like very close friends. And the thing is that developing a story like that it's a family that's growing up, facing their own conflicts and everything, at the same time that I was building my own family, was a very intense process for me in terms that made me very aware about family dynamics, problems that the children could have, the responsibilities that parents have in terms of how the consequences of your act affect the people that lives with you and everything. So it became a very intimate process for me. So I have very fond memories of that on one hand, and in the other, it became something that until today we still discussing with Joe and Chris ideas of what we could do in Locke and Key again. We all want to return to this universe at some point. Right now, it's not possible because of the commitment we have, but we've been discussing ideas for a big story arc to done in the hopefully medium future from now. So if it was just on our hands, we would guarantee that we will return to Locke and Key. The point is that we don't know exactly when, but we feel that we have stories that we want to tell in that universe. It's not that we want to go back to Locke and Key because it was successful. No, one of the things that we were very aware is that we didn't want to squeeze Locke and Key to the point that it drains. So, but the point is that even, for example, the Golden Age and the crossover, those started very tiny concepts for very small stories, and it started growing and having a life on its own. And at the very end, when we closed with the crossover, that entire arc, the first thing that we commented with Joe was, okay, Mary Locke is such a cool character that we need to make more stories with her. Yes, but on the other hand, we want to return to Bodhi Locke and whatever happened to Kinsey after she grew up, and what happens with Tyler when he starts forgetting the magic of the keys and key house. So we know there's room to keep exploring there. And also we have a concept for a big arc that would make sense, tying the story of the past of the Locke family with the present. So yeah, I'd say that if the people that became in love with Locke and Key and its world want some more, I can't promise them that they're going to get it very soon. But what I can say for sure is that we're eager to tell more stories in that universe. So it's a matter of time.
And what were your thoughts about the Netflix TV series? Because it has it's an adaptation of your book, but it's really not like your book.
Yes,
it's not all the elements of horror are gone. They tried to do something which were more like in a
fantasy adventure series.
Fantasy.
Yeah. So for me, it was a very interesting experience. I'm very open-minded regarding adaptations because I think it's very difficult to do something very, very, very close to the original and not become a pointless iteration of the same story. What to tell twice something that's already told in a way that works. So even though I don't discard those kind of adaptations, I'm very curious every time that someone decides, okay, we want to do an adaptation of this, but we want to change this and this. So in that regard, the production team of the Netflix series was very straightforward with us from early on, and they told us, we love the story, we love this universe and its potential and its characters, but we want to change this and this because we want to reach a different audience, and we think these elements have potential and everything. So I was like very curious about that. I had no problem with it because for me, and I think for Joe as well, we always thought that our Locke Key is already told and it's completed. And yeah, one of the things that was very like that get me some calm about the prospect of the adaptation is that the story was already closed. I think it's very dangerous when you have a story like that and you haven't finished it and it gets an adaptation or a different version, because I think the temptation to transform your original concept if the other version is successful, for example, because I don't know, if we hadn't finished Locke Key and they released a series and it became, I don't know, successful as Stranger Things or Game of Thrones or something like that, and then you realize maybe what I'm doing is not that good, and maybe if I lean in that direction, that temptation I think version, is very dangerous. So yeah, I think I'm very aware that all the people that worked in the production of the Netflix series did their best. They really cared about the story and characters, and they tried their best. I think some of the choices that they took worked, and some others didn't. And that was also interesting for me, because I started thinking, why this didn't work? What is the thing that was missing? Or what was the thing that they moved so apart from the original that started like creating problems? So in that regard, it was like a very, it was a cool teaching experience for me. And the other thing is that at least I was happy that they had their plan. Originally, it was planned to do 4 seasons, but then Netflix like changed their basic mode of production. They're trying to stay in a 3-season format for most of their series. Just a few ones from time to time they allow to have more seasons. So they had to adapt their original plan to that. But I guess they fixed sort of that with the episode count of the seasons. I don't know exactly what it is. And the other thing that was amazing is that they invited us to be on set to watch all the production elements, to interact with the actors, to see how the scenes were shot. That was really fantastic to see. And then they asked us to do a cameo in the series, reprising a role in which I had drawn herself into the comics. So that was extremely funny to be a part of. So I also now, as we did have a line of dialogue, each of us in the series, I had an official credit as an actor. So if my comics career fails, at least I have an escape door over there. Yeah. Maybe I can try an alternative career thanks to that.
Gabriel, next Hollywood star. So getting back to comics, in recent years, you're still doing comics, but also for the French market, you did an album with Les Humanoïdes Associés.
Yeah,
I don't know how it's called in English. Maybe the Helm of Resurrection.
The Custom of Resurrections is in English.
Yeah, and I was wondering if that changed something to your artistic approach, because with bigger pages, the pacing is really not the same.
Yes.
And so, yeah,
no, it was quite an experience. For me, it was very significant because one of the earliest experiences I had with comic books, in which realized that comic was a form of art, was checking some comics from humanoids. We got access to, I think, a Spanish edition of Metal Horland, and in Chile in a couple libraries. So I got a few copies of that. I got a few episodes of The Inkle, for example, and some La Nuit de Philippe Rouillet as well, some things from Casa, and several stuff from Mobius. And then I got to check some art from Blueberry, and then I realized that Jean Giraud and Mobius were the same person, which was insane for me to realize. And I was always in love with that aesthetic and that I got access to comics from Herman Hoppen as well when I was young. I loved his art style and his narrative. So it was fun because when I began in comics in the US, I think that my work somehow filtered some elements from the European sensibility towards comic book into the American market. I was very aware of that when I did the adaptation of Clive Barker's The Great and Secret Show, and then in Locke Key as well. I think it has sort of a European back flavor in the way I approach the aesthetic and the storytelling. So when I got contacted by Humanoids to do this bande dessinée album, I was very excited. Then I got the script and I realized it was going to be insanely complicated to pull off, because it had basically all the things that I try to avoid, which are armies, multitude, period pieces, ships, all the things that are like a big no-no. Yeah. This is impossible to draw. But I read the script and I fell in love with the story immediately. It was a very well-rounded story written by Hiro Je. And the thing is that I started working on the first few pages and immediately realized that the page radio, being different, wider than the American one, completely changed the way in which you approach the storytelling and the way in which you frame the scene in the panels. So, for example, I realized early on that the kind of stuff that you fit into a double page spread in an American comics fits in half a page in a bande dessinée album. So I immediately realized, this is going to be trickier than I thought, because basically each page of a bande dessinée album for me took like 3 times the time that it took me to do an American comics page. So luckily the main concern of the editors was that the book will come out with the best quality possible. So they were very flexible with me in terms of time for the scheduling of the project. And the other thing was that even though I was being very slow, I was being steady. So even though if it was a couple of pages I could pull off a week, it was a constant flow of a couple of pages. So they managed to coordinate in advance the work with the colorist and the letterer and the production of the book. But it was insanely exhausting, but it was a fantastic creative challenge. It was a great creative experience. I'm very, very proud of the final result of the book. I think it's one of the finest pieces of work that I have ever done. And it was fun because after that, I got to do a 48 pages story for Savage Sword of Conan. That's also in the same page radio. So it was like doing another European album with a different character. But all that previous experience with Chasm of Resurrections helped me a lot to figure out how to deal with the Conan story in that different format.
And I guess it was maybe the total opposite when you took on the Dawn of the Black Axe, because it's very small. It was very fun because in the last 3-4 years, I worked just in projects that are in different formats than the traditional American comic books. So when I did, Mouse Guard was the thing that I did right after I finished the French album. So it was great because Mouse Guard has a very complex world building with lots of details, lots of very nuanced, characterized characters. I got to apply all the experience that I got from Chasm into Mouse Guard, and it felt so cozier because the pages were smaller and with less panels. So I was able to put a lot of work into the Mouse Guard book, and it felt like really easy. Also, I know David from a decade ago. We were very close friends. So doing that book feel like walking home. It was a very cozy project. And was it easy to adjust your style? Because it really looks like you transformed a little bit your pencils to look like more than what David Peterson does also.
Yeah, I think the challenge was, I think that the graphic style that I have basically stayed, but I tried to, the depiction of the characters and also the way in which they convey the emotions to make it as close as possible to the way in which David works. Because one of the things that appeal a lot of David's works is that the animals in the story really look like animals. They are not humanized. They have like human emotions, but not distorting the features of the animal. So the work is incredibly subtle. And I try to stay as close to that as possible. I also tricked David because as I really wanted this story to blend with the universe of Mouse Guard, with a thing that has a very distinctive visual language. So David asked me, who do you want to color this book? Because the plan of David was to write the story, send me to get in charge of the drawings, and then another guy would color it while he was still working in his own book for Mouse Guard. But then I told me, if you ask me to pick, sorry, but I had to pick you. I think you're the best guy able to color a book in this world. So sorry. And unfortunately for him, he agreed.
Yeah, and that's why he's late on his own book right now.
Exactly.
That's your fault.
He can't blame me because he gave me the option to choose, and I picked the best. So,
okay, and so what's next for you right now? What? Because I know also you did a creator-owned book called The Sword of Ages.
Yes.
Which is supposed to have a sequel at some point because the end of the fifth issue was not the end at all. So what's next for you, Gabriel?
Sword of Ages is sort of put on hold because there's an editorial entanglement around that needs to have some work. But we got the rights back from the series, so we can start making plans for that in the near future, I hope. But before that, there were a couple happy accidents that happened that were very nice. One of those was that Humanoids recently did a Kickstarter campaign to do a English edition of Chasm of Resurrections with a Cosmo Pirates comic book that Alejandro Jodorowsky did with Pete Woods. And I since I was a kid, I had this dream of having the chance to do anything with Alejandro, being a Chilean creator that was a reference for me when I was younger. Because of the Incolor and other stuff that he had done, then I became a huge fan of the Metabarons series. Then they told me that they wanted to launch this campaign, adding a bonus book that was going to be an adaptation of a short story that Alejandro wrote inspired in his childhood, that they wanted to turn into a magic fable, and they wanted me to do a comic adaptation of that. So it's going to be a little book that's going to be added to the set of graphic novels. And I did the script adaptation and the art for that book. And I just finished it before getting here to this show in Ghent. So that's the very next thing that's going to be announced. And after that, I'm doing a couple years ago, I did a short horror story for Skybound that was supposed to be a part of their current publishing of Creepshow magazine. But the thing is that the editor liked a lot the character that we created and the sort of the concept that we developed for the story. So he told us, me and Matthew Rosenberg, which is the writer, he told us, we might better not use this story for Creepshow. We will shelve it because we want you to develop this to create a new series. So in the last couple of years, as I work in other stuff, we've been discussing this project that's going to become a new comic series that Skybound's going to start publishing probably next year, because right after I return to Chile after this trip, I'm going to start working in that. And the thing is that we have already designed the concept. We should have the final script for the first chapter probably in the next couple of weeks. And the plan is to start working on that, but the publisher wants to publish it once we are finishing the first start, to make sure that it will be available as a whole for the readership. So I'm hoping that in the second half of the year, that project is going to be publicly announced and would be like a new creator-owned project for me, which has me very excited, because I think even though having some elements of things that I've done before, it has certain approach in the way in which we're going to tackle the narration and the character development. That's something that I've never done before. So it's going to be a great challenge.
All right. We'll be looking forward to it. Thank you so much for your time, Gabriel.
No, it was a pleasure. It was a great conversation. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you.